Hello and welcome to At Home with the Hugheses. It's Tim and Rachel Hughes, and we are in Series 2, Episode 2.
That's right.
And
we are at home. In fact, some of our children have already broken up for the holidays. So if there is any background noise, that's what it will be.
Yes, I can see one of our kids hovering. He's just very, I don't know, to be proud or terrified. He's doing
deep fried mozzarella sticks.
He's so posh.
I know. That's just, a regular lunch in the school holidays.
I mean, our kids actually, when they were growing up, when we were in London, I always remember going into McDonald's with them and them asking if they could have chicken goujons.
Yeah, that was when they were very little. They soon realised that's not
chicken
whatever.
Nuggets, come on.
Nuggets.
Come on, get with the programme. But we hope you're well. We are looking today at this idea of lids versus limits, that the reality is, in life, in leadership, you can't have everything. I think that sometimes isn't a lie that the world would throw at us.
Well, I think absolutely, and we'll come on to this in a bit more detail. Certainly, I think for women, there's...
And for men.
Well, and for men, but this is, I think, forgive me if I say that this is particularly pertinent to women in the 21st century. This notion of you can have it all, basically.
Yeah.
And I think what we're trying to get at with this phrase, lids and limitations, and we're going to break down the difference between the two, is that in life there are limitations.
Yes.
And therefore, actually, that notion of you can have it all, and I agree that is pertinent to men and women, but it's a phrase that's been particularly used in the context of female empowerment, et cetera, and I'm going to unpack some of the nuance within that. But I think essentially what we're trying to say is, actually, you can't have it all at the same time, all of the time. And that's a really important lesson in following Jesus, being obedient to the call on your life.
Now, just before we go on, why don't you, what is the difference between a lid and a limit?
Yeah, and I think this has been a particular revelation to me. And I remember sort of coining this phrase, lids versus limits. Yeah, guilty.
I'm sure I read a book
one of my better thoughts.
I'm sure I read a book on it by someone.
Oh, you probably did, darling. It's probably your idea. All the best ones are.
Didn't want to say it.
Anyway, and it was just a helpful way in my mind of framing some of what I sensed God was sort of speaking to me about. And essentially, this is my understanding, is that essentially a lid is like a glass ceiling, like a container, something that is put on you to contain and therefore stop from coming to the fore the things that God has called you to.
Yeah.
And so, again, we'll unpack a little bit more about what that might look like in our lives, but it could be a particular pattern of sin. It could be a posturing of your heart, so like insecurity or pride.
Fear.
Fear is an obvious one. Something that, again, thinking about the assault that we come under as followers of Jesus, that triple alliance of the flesh, the world, and the devil. We don't need to necessarily unpack that in this moment, but the way those three forces work together to essentially stop you from stepping fully into all that God has called you to. And essentially what happens is this narrative may get born in your mind at a young age, like that could then manifest its way in fear or insecurity or pride or whatever it might be. And the values of the world kind of, echo it, reinforce it. The flesh just sort of feeds on it. Yeah. And then the enemy comes in and energizes it.
Ooh.
Oh, that was quite good, wasn't it? I love that. That was off the top of my head as well. Wow, what was in that tea? Anyway, sorry, that was a bit too much. Sorry.
It was just straight Earl Grey tea.
It was Earl Grey tea.
Earl Grey tea, chicken goujons. Oh my goodness.
Oh gosh, we're so posh.
We are.
Anyway, moving on. Essentially, that's what a lid is. Oh, what?
But you are wearing a hoodie.
I'm wearing a hoodie, so that's okay. It's actually an Orchard hoodie.
Oh, here we go. Go on, carry on.
Shameless advertising. It's from season 2023. But anyway, so that's what a lid is. Yeah. Something that stops us that is usually planted by that triple alliance.
You said that. So,
okay.
so that's the lid. What is a limit?
And then a limit is usually, I would say, a good thing.
Or not necessarily, though. It's a reality.
Okay, that's a better way to frame it. That's a good idea. It's a reality, thank you, of your current season.
Yes.
That limits what you might be able to do.
And it's not going to go away. And actually pretending it's not there won't ultimately be helpful.
It will potentially damage the people around you.
Yeah, so a limit.
So an obvious example in my life, well, and in your life, because you're their father.
And mine as well.
Is that we have 5 children.
Yes.
And and this is where it's nuanced, of course, because they're also ministry. Do you know what I mean? So it's not like ministry is all the stuff. I'm just using me as an example. It's not like ministry is all the stuff that I do outside of the home, and then the home is just this thing that I have to do. Like what I do in the home, in parenting my children, in caring for the family, that is also ministry. So I just want to caveat, nuance it. But I know I'm also called to leadership, ministry, serving the Lord, serving the church outside of my family, outside of being a mother to those 5 wonderful children. But the type of and the volume of ministry that I can do outside of loving, nurturing, caring for my 5 children is limited in a particular way in this season, and that limit sort of ebbs and flows depending on the season, depending on the age and the needs of the children, is limited because of them.
Another example would be marriage.
Yes.
In that, I mean, and Paul talks about this, that, you know, that the gift of celibacy and singleness is that you can give all of yourself to ministry. And in marriage, or at times in our journey, particularly early on in our marriage, where I had opportunities to travel a lot more and was away, actually a limit was actually, I want to have a healthy marriage. I want to honor you. I've made vows to you, and therefore needed to make sure I wasn't away so much that our marriage became very difficult to become healthy, flourishing, thrive. So, I mean, there are other limits. That's why I said they're not all necessarily good things. There can be limits around a health condition.
Yes, and again, we know friends who are ministering within the context of serious health issues, you know, that perhaps cause fatigue. I mean, that would be an obvious one, or sort of continuous pain.
Yes.
And therefore, they don't have the energy levels or the capacity of somebody that has a healthy body.
Age can be another one, that you just don't have the same mobility or energy. And so I guess the point, and we're going to discuss this, is actually these things don't necessarily, they might limit us, but they don't limit God.
Ooh, very good.
If this wasn't an expensive mic, I'd drop it right now on the floor.
Well, to be honest, the moment that I really started to think about it was reading the book of Philippians. I've just been sort of reading through that for quite a long time. That's like, there's only, I don't know, is it 5 chapters or 4 chapters of Philippians? Oh dear.
I think it's 4.
Anyway, I'm only in chapter 2 because I'm reading it very slowly, very meaningfully. Anyway, what we know, of course, is that Paul is in prison. He's writing to the Philippian church in prison. And so he's limited. Like, and
the chains were real.
Literally, he has these 4 walls and a ceiling around him. He's limited. And yet he doesn't allow it to become a lid.
Yes.
He's still effective he writes one of the epistles that we now, still 2,000 years later
You're still reading.
Is still reading very slowly.
Still reading it.
It's in the canon of scripture. And so I guess that's the point. And the whole point of trying to discern around lids and limitations is to work out the difference.
Yes.
That's the key, because I think the danger is we can muddle the two up.
Yes, because if we believe, again, so much of the epistles in the New Testament, that theme of God's power being made perfect in our weakness, his strength. We hold this treasure in our jars of clay. The danger is we doubt what God can do because we see things through an earthly lens of, I need to be strong. I need to have, best levels of energy, my sharpest thinking, my whatever it is, greatest levels of intellect for God to most use me.
That's right.
But actually, this is the mystery that when we recognize these limitations and work within them, God does something extraordinary. And actually, those things that feel like limitations actually can often be where the richest ministry flows from. So, I mean, why don't you talk a bit about, I guess, some of the revelations and some of the things you've been thinking through around motherhood. And I know that's one example, because I do think it's important to note men also experience.
Absolutely. And also it's about how parenting works out between the two of us, because obviously there will be people listening where the dad is the stay-at-home parent, and the mum is working, and that's great. But for us, in our context, our eldest child is now 17, our youngest is 4. And for those 17 years, I have been predominantly the stay-at-home parent. And when I say stay-at-home, I haven't been at home the entire time. There have been periods, years, where I have been primarily at home. But there's also been seasons where I've stepped into work part-time. There have been seasons where I've been back at work full-time. And I think that's the key for me, is that the limitations ebb and flow with the seasons. And probably the biggest revelation of my life, and I know we've talked about this in previous episodes, is this idea that life is in seasons, which is why the notion of you can have it all is so unhelpful. I think particularly as a woman, because...
And as a man.
No,
No, because I don't think... I know what you're going to say, and I hear you.
I think you're being pedantic, if I can be honest with you. Anyway, I know what you're trying to say, but because essentially this notion of, I'm going to justify why I'm speaking specifically to women, because I think it's come from this swing, hasn't it? Over the last, 70 years, we have seen this swing within society, within sort of acceptable ways of gender roles being played out. Women were 70 years ago, women were at home. They raised the children, they did the cooking, they did the cleaning. And there were very, very few exceptions to that. And I personally, we both would say it's a really, really good thing that isn't it, Tim?
All these things go through my mind, having to be, yes, absolutely.
Thank you. That women now have access to education, higher education. We're now no longer deemed as this sort of, intellectually inferior being. And we have capabilities that go beyond the home, beyond raising children, beyond domestic duties. And that's a really good thing.
Well, and it's recognizing, of course, the creation mandate of male and female both being made in the image of God, and seeing both genders fully released into all areas of leadership and gifting and intellect and
it's
creativity.
Only a blessing to the church,
100%,
and
to the world,
and even to marriage and family, etc., etc. That, like with any swing, though, the danger is you swing so far the other way that, and this is my fear, actually, as a woman, not just as a woman, actually as a mother, because I think that's really important, is motherhood involves biology, as counter-cultural as that might be in these days. It involves biology. A woman carries the child. As a mother, she nurtures the child in a very particular and special way in those early months, I dare say even in those early years. And you can't escape that. We've got 5 children by birth and adoption. I know that journey very, very well. And it requires huge amounts of emotional capacity, physical capacity. And I think the danger of that you can have it all narrative, is that what it does is it devalues that season of motherhood, particularly when children are little. And that, to me, is such a great, great, great shame. that I am all about, I mean, I run the orchard, you know this. I am all about women empowered, released to fulfill their God-given purpose and call. No question, full stop. But what worries me is that we don't buy in hook, line, and sinker to secular feminism that essentially says, is almost like a complete swing in the opposite direction. Well, almost actually weirdly back to 1950s, which is where being at home with children was deemed as lesser. I mean, that's the irony. And actually we see the same narrative being played out, that now you can have it all. Oh, isn't it so much better to be out there in the workplace, in the workforce, doing these roles outside of the home, and we still consider being at home with small children as the less valuable choice. And
of course,
that to say.
But we also recognise, as you said,
it's
couples
nuanced.
are going to figure out different balances.
Absolutely.
Some, for financial reasons, there's no other option but going back.
Yes, I
so
fully
there's
acknowledge
a whole
that.
mix, and everyone's got to figure it out. But yes, I think the point
I think I'm talking about it in principles.
Yes.
Not in sort of
specifics.
Specifics, because the specifics are going to look different from every family, every couple. And also, we've had 5 children. That's unusual. We've had a lot of children. Yes, yes we have. Don't we know it? And they're wonderful. And so my point is, in the context of limitations, that the big learning for me as a woman who is called to church leadership, church pastoring, and to motherhood, I cannot have it all at the same time. There is a constant shifting ebb and flow of prioritization, balancing, that I have to stay really attuned to the Holy Spirit for. That's what I've learned. That and right now, I know that the balance in terms of my time, because I'm a finite, I mean, that's the other big limitation. Yeah. We're human.
Yeah.
We have a finite amount of energy and capacity. And so I know, as a finite human being, with what I have, at the moment, I know the balance needed to shift more so that more of my time was being spent with the family, with the children, and less was being spent in church leadership. Now, because I've been on this journey for a long, long time, I know that will shift again. But right now, that's meant, in practical terms, I've stepped out of day-to-day church leadership. So I'm just doing 1 day a week now. And the rest of the time, I'm doing a day a week on the orchard. And then the rest of the time, I'm home. I'm running the family. And it's not glamorous. It's not exciting. It's all unseen. A lot of it is pretty mundane. But it's exactly where I'm supposed to be.
And I'd say looking, particularly those years, I don't know how many years it was, 5, 7 years, where the predominant childcare of our kids, and I know at times it's quite grueling, mundane, costly. We've talked before, me travelling.
I mean, also beautiful and amazing.
Oh, yeah. Me travelling and sometimes feeling like you were missing out,
resentful,
or left behind. Oh, resentful, your word.
Definitely.
It's probably fair. But actually, I can see now the incredible fruit I'd say you're now walking in because of these years. I mean, firstly, and most importantly, our kids, who they are. And, they're amazing. We're so proud of them and love them. I mean, gosh, they're not perfect, but we're so proud of them. But also, I think the ministries you're walking in, the church leadership, the orchard, the character formed within you, I think God did so much there that was hidden, unseen, and you can't necessarily put a finger on it. But I don't think you'd be doing anything of what you're doing now to the level without those years. And I think I was going to say something else. My mind's gone.
Oh, no. Well, I could jump in if you want.
Yes, please
always
do.
Ready. I think also. Oh, do you know, my mind's gone now as well.
Oh, gosh.
We're a right old pair, aren't we?
The limit of age.
Goodness.
The limit of age.
There you go.
No, I know what I was going to say.
Go on.
So I actually think when we came to start the church, I'd obviously had the theological and the official kind of Church of England leadership training. But I think you'd had an amazing training as well. That wasn't through an official university of understanding people, leadership, the important things. That was an amazing gift. And those two things coming together, because I think just coming in with church leadership training, and the danger of it all is it becomes a little bit theory.
Yeah.
Or, do this, that, and the other. Whereas actually that grit and reality of life and the time spent with other mums and mess of kid, all of that, I think you brought exceptional insights and just a decision making that was so different from mine, but so incredibly brilliant. And so I think that's the thing. You were learning and getting a leadership coaching, as it were, from that season of motherhood. And
then it's having the courage to step back into, the arena, the work arena, whatever that looks like. And I think that's the other side that's sad, is that I think some mums never have the confidence to then step back in, because it is such a hidden season.
And I'd say maybe another example of a limitation beyond just the one of motherhood is, I think, so sometimes, my darker moments, I think, I wish I'd just travel the world, led worship, spent time in green rooms. People are actually sort of, glad to have you there. But the reality of leading a church is you're in a community, you're around, you get lots of stuff thrown at your door. People aren't particularly impressed or excited to see you. In fact, they're quite cross with you about X, Y, Z, which is beautiful. And that is community, local church, leadership. It's you're building slowly, bit by bit. But actually, at times, where I've thought, it'd have been brilliant just to not have to worry about anything with the church, that just travel, do what I want. Actually, I think the limit of being committed to leading a local church, which has massively curtailed travel, time to record, time to songwrite, time to do certain things, actually, as well as there's been beauty in that. And I think God's done something beautiful in me through that.
Yeah.
And so I think that could be seen as a limit. Sometimes it has been. But actually, that's been right for this season. Now, it might not always be the season where you're, limit travel, but you've got to trust God in it. And actually, again, I remember a moment where we just adopted Summer, and it was a Sunday evening. You were, I think, preaching at church, and I was trying to put her to bed. And I remember feeling like, I'm missing out. I want to be at church. It's exciting Sunday night, and I've got to put this little baby to bed. And it's like she's not going to bed.
I did quite a few Sunday nights like that. Not that it's a competition. We're not keeping track.
But I remember in that moment,
love keeps no records of. It wasn't wrong. Anyway, sorry.
But I remember in that moment just feeling God's pleasure.
Yeah.
And actually, I could be leading worship at any event or in front of however many thousand or whatever, but this was something beautiful and something kingdom, just loving a child, putting it to bed, being a safe space. And that really struck me that actually I was right where God wanted me to be.
That's what he did. And I think part of it is rejecting some of the metrics of the culture, isn't it? Rejecting some of the narratives of the culture around what success looks like. And again, thinking about that time, when we decided to add a new little one to our family through adoption, I knew that it would mean stepping right back out again. Yeah. And in a sense, sort of culturally or by the values of the world, that was like career suicide, because I was really flourishing in the role that I had as a church leader. The orchard was just about to get started. And in some ways, I guess in terms of my career, it was really a backward step. But I absolutely knew God had called us to do it. And B, I think because I'd already spent so many years sort of in the trenches, as it were, of being a mum at home, I knew that it was just a season. And I think I'm on B, actually. B, I knew it was just a season. C, I'd learn enough to know that with God, there's no such thing as sort of a career backstep or career suicide. Like when you make a choice to die to self and pour your love into another person, and obviously I'm talking about this context, but it could be other things, it's never, ever a backward step in terms of the kingdom. Ever.
Absolutely. And here's an interesting thing. I actually as well think sometimes I think it's important we put limits at times around us. I think, we've seen at times where ministries grow bigger and bigger and bigger. Leaders have more and more power.
Yeah.
That actually as human beings, the track record is people can't cope with that and make really bad choices.
Absolutely.
I always remember one of my heroes, great guy called Rich Nathan, led this amazing church, Columbus Vineyard Church, and he retired. And I remember hearing his talk when he handed on the church to this new couple. And I've got it on my phone. I've always, occasionally look at it. But so he just said this, and he's like parting words to them. So Eric and Julia, this is his kind of encouragement to them in their new role as leaders of the church. He was stepping out. Voluntarily choose to limit your power. Choose to limit what you receive financially. Limit what you will buy and what you will own and what you will drive. Be model givers in this church. Give more than a tithe. Put limits on your appetites and boundaries on your relationships. Limit how you make decisions and give away power, real power, to other people and other teams. And he goes on to say, Eric and Julia, the people of God are way bigger than any single person. The church is always more important than any of its leaders. Avoid the temptation to slap your name photo everywhere. He goes on to say, the people I've always admired are people who built something bigger than themselves. Because Eric and Julia, none of us are irreplaceable. There will come a time when you'll hold a service for your successes.
Amazing.
And so I think that's been a helpful thing, isn't it? For how do we, in our decision-making, in our accountability, in releasing others, you're in many ways limiting yourself.
Do I was just reminded of a podcast that I was listening to recently. It's the Boehmer podcast. And it's fascinating, basically sort of theologically going through the book of Genesis from the creation story. And I think it's Marty Sampson is the guy that hosts the podcast.
It's not. He's a lead singer.
Oh, yeah. I think it might be actually Marty somebody. No. Anyway, Marty Solomon.
Yes. Marty Sampson, we know Marty.
Marty Sampson is amazing.
Anyway, this is Marty. In Australia.
Anyway, Marty Solomon.
You own the universe.
Oh, stop now,
what
please. Yeah, it's beautiful. Anyway, in this podcast, he was talking about the Genesis story. And one of the big revelations that he shared that was just like hit me between the eyes, I'd never heard this before, is that obviously God created. He created for 7 days. He created for 6 days. Yeah. And then at the end of the 6 days, he stopped and he rested. And that idea that God would say, I'm done. Like as in, we stop now. You create, and then stop.
Yeah.
He makes the point that you see that sort of play out. And actually where the human race goes wrong is we have missed the revelation of when to say stop, enough. It's enough. I just thought that was so unbelievably powerful and pertinent. That it's about limitations, isn't it? Yeah. It's essentially God demonstrates to us through the creation story that yes, creativity, innovation is so good. Let's keep moving forward. But he demonstrates for us that there comes a point where you say, stop, enough, it's good.
You see, and I've been reflecting on this. I think where most leaders make bad choices, I think it most often happens when busyness has taken over, where you've stopped to rest. I mean, the last episode, we were talking about the sort of gift of space from our sabbatical, and actually for reflection and for things, maybe ugly things to come up within, recognition of where you're out of sync with your God-given design and mandate. But I think in busyness, we're tired, we're overstretched. You begin to find your appetites being fed in the wrong places. You begin to think that the whole world and this whole ministry is dependent on you.
Yeah.
Lies kick in. And actually then you become a shell of yourself, and you then make a really bad life choice. And so the gift of space, that limit of, okay, I'm not going to...
Rest is a limitation, yeah.
I'm going to empower the team to lead on that Sunday. I'm going to make sure I take all my holiday, and I'm not going to preach as many Sundays as I have done. And the voice can be, the church won't grow the same because that's the gift of my life. It's like, no, if you're thinking like that, you're in a bad place, and you're going to make a bad choice. Actually releasing power, putting the limits of physical, just reality of needing time and space, I think holds us, protects us, keeps us humble, keeps us childlike, keeps us in a space where God can keep using us and watching over us.
Yeah. I'm just wondering if it's worth talking a little bit more about lids. We've talked a lot about limitations.
Absolutely.
And I was thinking another, probably the most significant lid for me was my past.
Yeah.
You know, that I was raised as a Christian. I mean, we grew up together.
Yeah.
And so we know each other's families really, really well. I've got amazing Christian parents who really demonstrated faith to me in sort of a very real, brilliant way. But in my teens, particularly, and in my early 20s, I was just sort of really allured by the world, essentially, and was very, very insecure, particularly about the way that I looked. I don't know if I've talked about this on this podcast, but and so that sort of cocktail led me to make some really bad decisions, particularly in the context of sort of sex and relationships. And this isn't a surprise to you, is it? So that's good. What? And so I remember vividly, like I never stopped, this is a phrase that I've used before, but I never stopped believing in Jesus. I just stopped following him for a while. And then when I came back, it was sort of my early 20s, I'd ended like a really unhelpful relationship, and I just knew that God was sort of calling me back and wanting to sort of set me on a different path. And you know, the story goes, prayed this like snotty, honest prayer to God, asking if I could come back. And I remember just being filled powerfully with the Holy Spirit. But what I remember feeling at the time was, yes, God loves me. I just knew, you know, I felt the power and the abundance of God's love for me in that moment. And his forgiveness. You know, I knew that I was forgiven, but I still felt like I had this sort of black mark against my name. And that would then, and this was all fairly subconscious, that would then impact what God might be able to do through me. You know, the ways in which God might be able to use me in the kingdom. And I was really, having sort of returned to him, I was longing to be of use, you know, in the kingdom. But I just figured, because I was kind of used goods, as it were, I thought, A, that would really impact the kind of guy that God might allow me to marry. And B, it would affect what I might be able to do. And so I never, ever thought in a million years, essentially, I guess I put a lid over myself at that point. I thought, not in a million years would I ever be able to marry someone like you. To be totally honest, you're pretty awesome. I also thought I'd never be up preaching the word, or kind of, I guess, being an advocate for the gospel in a I guess, a more visible way. It just never, ever occurred to me that somebody that had made the kind of choices that I had made would ever be able to do that. And of course, that's the message of the gospel.
Yeah.
It's the Isaiah 61, beauty for ashes. It's the God who turns things around. He doesn't just sort of look past the things that we see as lids. Quite the opposite. He turns them. He tears off the lid, and then he uses them in the most extraordinary ways. And what I've found out is the very things that I thought would form a lid have become the things that he's used most prominently in my life.
And this has been a principle I've seen time and time again, where someone's had a battle in a particular area, or experienced some trauma or challenge or difficulty, attack. Actually, in bringing it to God, God can actually use that thing, as you said, that was a lid that caused deep pain, that you can then have incredible authority to bring freedom and healing to others. The thing the enemy maybe threw at you to keep you down, stay in your box, actually, when you allow God to release you and set you free, you then, and that's what you get this time and time again.
Yeah.
You sharing honestly your story and what God's done in you has brought freedom and hope and encouragement and life to many, many others. And so if you're listening, if there's an area where there's a lid, deal with it, allow God to bring healing and freedom, get good people around you to process it, because that thing that feels like defeat at the moment, I believe God can use to bring victory, not only to yourself, but when God does something for you, it's always so that it can also be done for many, many others.
I wonder as well if it's worth us just ending by thinking about, what are some of the lids in your life? Me, pour moi.
I get to share.
Oh, see. But also, I think this is quite important, where people view lids as limitations.
Ooh.
So again, thinking about someone, for example, where the underlying lid is fear.
Yes.
But there's this psychological talk called a racket, where essentially you sort of, it's almost like, it's not quite a lie in the sense that you're not sort of, blatant deceit.
So a racket would be, just for people to know, like you go into a shop, it looks like a newsagent's.
The shop front.
Yes, you go in, but then there's a door that leads into a massive sort of gambling ring.
It's from the 20s when,
club
prohibition, etc. That's where it comes from. Yeah. So a racket is basically a front.
I think I just explained it. I know. Basically, I know. I probably didn't explain it as well.
No, but you explained the concept, but what that actually means for us as human beings is, it's the idea that you
a shop front.
A front, but actually behind is
a gambling.
Okay, you've explained it. So, for example,
would you be a lid or a limit for me?
Very good. So, for example, what's going on behind is fear, but it might present as, this is the reason I can't do it.
Yes.
Or that's the reason that I can't do it. So a lid may be presented as a limitation.
Yes.
Does that make sense?
No, and I see this, we see this a lot, don't we?
Yeah.
But how do you discern it?
I know.
That's what's hard, isn't it? Because I think some people, they don't see that perhaps they've kind of acquiesced or given into a lie, and they so they can present all the valid reasons. Oh yeah, no, I understand. But actually, those limits might change depending on the season and the stage. But really, it's the fear of stepping out. What if God doesn't come through? What if I'm not enough.
What if I fail? And I think, again, thinking about lids versus limits is that when a person essentially presents a lid as a limitation, I think often the result is sort of like hyper-boundaried. And again, we're not contradicting what we've just said, because limits create these boundaries, which are good. But I also think there's a state which I would call hyper-boundaried, which is where you don't take any risks. You don't put yourself in the place of any kind of discomfort.
You say no to everything.
You say no to everything, or a lot of things. Anything that might, risk failure.
Yeah.
Anything that might risk you looking stupid.
Yeah.
Or like a fool.
Yeah.
Anything that might risk your comfort.
I see. Failure, fool.
Oh, that would have been so good, wouldn't it?
Anyway.
For comfort.
Yeah.
And I think that's what we've got to ask ourselves. Am I saying no to this because of a good limit that exists within this season?
Like at times, we've stopped travelling.
Yeah. Or like me saying no to day-to-day church leadership right now. I'm
season,
saying
yes.
no, not because it's a lid. I can absolutely before God and say this has got nothing to do with a lid. This is because of the reality of the limitations in my life right now. So that's the question. That's the discernment question. Am I saying no to this due to a good limitation? I'm being a good steward of the limitations in my life. Or am I saying no to this because actually it's in response to a lid that God is asking me to push through? That's the
I
discernment.
think a lid in my life has been people-pleasing.
Interesting.
That I think I've at times sought affirmation. I mean, we you know this through often sort of authority figures in my life.
Have you?
Right.
Oh, sorry.
Sheesh.
Sorry. Bit insensitive.
It's good for people to see what I have to live with. And I think as I reflect back, there are times I've led in a way or haven't stepped out on certain things because that they wouldn't have been necessarily understood or valued or championed perhaps by leaders or authority figures in my life. Or I've taken way too much...
responsibility?
No, I've put way too much on them for affirmation. Like
Their
almost
approval.
Like, yeah. So almost, and therefore not sought the approval of God, the Father. That actually the most important thing is, what is my Father in heaven saying? What is he calling me into? What is he giving me permission to step into? Not thinking, well, that leader won't understand that choice, or they won't value this, or they won't understand why I'd want to do that. And so therefore the people-pleasing has meant that I think there have been times I've slightly stepped away from decisions or gone after things because I knew that they wouldn't understand or approve. And their value, their affirmation has at times meant more to me than honouring and obeying the call of God.
Yeah. Do you know, I can think of a lid limitation for you.
Oh, sheesh.
No, I think
we're
it
meant to do it
totally...
for one
I
another.
know, but
Go
I
on.
just think it might be helpful.
Go on.
Because I know that when you were sort of starting out as a worship leader, you were trained up in an environment where there was a very, very high value on humility.
Yeah.
And that's a good thing.
Yeah.
But there was also very clear definitions around what humility looked like that weren't, I think, wholly right. That actually humility isn't making yourself as invisible as possible.
Well, in this
necessarily.
context, it'd be like literally playing guitar,
Playing
closing
guitar,
your eyes,
don't say anything,
not moving,
don't
say
speak,
anything.
don't draw any
Yeah.
kind of attention to yourself.
Yeah.
And like I said, we don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. There was some real good in that has actually set both of us up in ministry in a good way. But I definitely saw in the early years of our marriage that it squashed a part of who God has made you to be.
Yeah.
That actually your great fun, your your personality, I think is more I don't know what the phrase is. I guess more fun-loving and light than you perhaps allowed it to be, because you thought that this sort of notion of humility was a limitation, a good limitation.
Yeah.
But actually, I think it put a lid on you stepping fully into who God had made you to be.
Well,
and I think you've been on a bit of a journey of throwing off some of that.
Yes.
And being, I guess owning a little bit more of the fullness of who God has made you to be.
Yeah.
And that's a good thing. You're still irritatingly one of the most humble people I know. But
Well, it's a misunderstanding of humility.
Exactly.
Yeah. So as we close...
are you shutting that down?
No, I'm
just
not.
moving
But I'm just,
on. You're aware of the time.
I just think it'd be great. I'd want to encourage people just to maybe take some time to think, what are the limits in your life? It could be financial. It could be a stage of life. It could, And almost ask God to reframe them, not as like, if only I could get out of that limit. If only, actually, how might God want to use you and empower you, speak to you, teach you, train you, equip you in this season, that limit might not be a bad thing. It could be the thing that actually releases God's blessing.
And shapes you into more like him, basically.
So where are those areas? And maybe sometimes I always think the best way of understanding those things are actually when you get other people to speak in.
Mm-hmm.
Other people around you, close friends, family, safe people, often can see in a way that we can be blinded to. So that's the first thing I'd encourage people. What are the limits that you need to pray, God, use me, work in and through these moments and limits? But then, really importantly, what are the lids? Mm-hmm. Ask God to reveal. Pray that he might speak to you. Again, ask friends, can you see any lids? Insecurities, fear, people-pleasing, addictions, pattern of behavior that are actually containing all that God might
want to release through you.
Yeah, and then pray that God would cut those ties, break those lids.
And any lids that are masquerading as limitations.
Yes.
I think that's quite a key bit of discernment that has to happen.
Which again, are most likely going to be best outworked and owned with a few very safe people speaking in. So there you go, lids and limits. We'll be joining you soon with episode 3. Hope it was helpful, and thanks so much for listening.